The largest ICE prison anywhere in the country is also in Texas. It's way out in West Texas on the Fort Bliss military base. They call it Camp East Montana. They only opened Camp East Montana in August. Already at least 3 people have died there, including one whose death was ruled a homicide by the county medical examiner, a homicide at the hands of staff at that facility. They wanted Camp East Montana to hold 5,000 people, but they never got the numbers there close to it. What with the people dying there and the measles outbreak there and the freaking tuberculosis there, seriously.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. Call them what you will, but America is building camps to concentrate human beings in inhumane conditions on an industrial scale. It may feel like we have turned the tide against ICE, given the massive backlash against their tactics in places like Minneapolis, but the agency still has a budget larger than the United States Marine Corps, and it is going to spend it. The anti-immigrant zeal of the Trump regime has in no way abated even after their humiliation in Minneapolis. And the culture of brutality that we all saw out in the open is now concealed behind barbed wire and within windowless warehouses. Thankfully, Americans are speaking out, not just in blue cities, but in deep red areas like Social Circle, Georgia.
This was a protest this weekend in Georgia against plans to build a 10,000-person Trump prison camp in Social Circle, Georgia. Donald Trump is telling the people of Social Circle, Georgia, that it doesn't matter that they don't want it, doesn't matter that their sewer system can't handle it, doesn't matter that their water system can't handle it. That little Republican voting Georgia town is going to be forced to take a 10,000-person Trump prison camp that will triple the population of their town to hold people indefinitely without trial and without access to lawyers. And I say that because I mean it specifically. The New York Times notes today that in the blueprints that have been made available for that facility in Social Circle, Georgia, among other problems in the blueprints, there do not appear to be any facilities whatsoever for the people being held there to meet with lawyers there. And that's because this is a black site prison to hold people without trial and without access to legal representation indefinitely. That is what all of these places are that they are trying to build.
This is the 400th episode of the Ken Harbaugh Show, and we've spent a lot of those episodes raising the alarm about fascism. When we used to talk about it, we focused on forces outside government that were trying to wield influence inside it. Today, the call is coming from inside the house. The ideology of fascism is now an animating principle of the Trump regime, as evidenced by black site prisons on U.S. soil where thousands are detained with no regard for due process. I spoke with researcher and author Chris Mathias about how fascist ideas and how fascists themselves have gone from the fringes of American politics to the halls of power. Here's our conversation. Chris, you started writing this book to catch a fascist years ago, back when there weren't fascists openly running our government, back when the president of the United States could get in trouble for saying there are good people on both sides of the Unite for Right rally, right? I feel like if he observed that today, he would say there weren't good people on both sides because the leftists are the bad guys and the fascists are the good guys. But surely that has had an effect on the way you think about the rise of fascism, about the very idea of catching a fascist. They're no longer outlaws. They're wearing uniforms and they're carrying badges. How has Trump 2.0 shaped your thinking in the course of writing this book?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting. I finished the first draft of this book on the day of Trump's second inauguration. So I literally closed my computer, opened my phone, and saw Elon Musk's Nazi salutes. And it felt like a fitting coda to the writing process. But yeah, a big part of the book is kind of the question you're getting at. It's about anti-fascists exposing fascists, but now, of course, the fascists are masks off, and they're in power. This book, I really got my start on this beat in Charlottesville, with this kind of for those that don't remember, I'm sure most people do, but, it's the largest white supremacist gathering in a generation. It ends with a Nazi driving his car into a crowd of counter protesters and killing Heather Heyer. And afterwards, like you mentioned, Trump calls, says they're very fine people on both sides. I think we forget the degree to which Charlottesville was a pro-Trump rally also. They were there because they were celebrating Trump's election. They felt responsible for propelling him into the White House. These Nazis, these fascists, thought that they had memed Trump into the White House, that their propaganda was responsible for him. So they were having a party. And I think it's a complicated narrative in my book, because my book is about how anti-fascists really, fought and fucked up the groups that were in Charlottesville. But ultimately, the ideas in Charlottesville, the chants of "you will not replace us," the calls for remigration, essentially ethnic cleansing, that's official government policy now.
That's what I want to talk about, because at that time, it felt like the conservative movement, MAGA, the Republican Party, was kind of playing with these fringe elements, playing with fire, if you will, but thinking they could control it, thinking they could keep them in their box, that in an election environment where marginal gains make all the difference, you needed that far right vote. And they really took to heart that Bannon edict, there are no enemies to the right. But at the time, 8 years ago, it seemed like they were in on the joke.
Yeah.
And that the joke was the fringe element that was memeing the heck out of MAGA and the Trump campaign and propelling Trump to victory, but that they would control it. And now the tables have been turned. The joke is on them. Even the vice president can't bring himself to condemn Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson's anti-Semitism. Did you see this phase of it coming way back in Trump 1.0 when the fascists were fringe?
Yeah. So fantastic question. Basically, the last decade of my life has been this kind of slow moving revelation that we were approaching the point that we're in now. Because I have been covering the fringe elements or the far right, and as my book documents, these anti-fascist researchers were as well. I think maybe the people, journalists like me, these anti-fascist researchers, we had a front row seat to how these once fringe ideas actually weren't that fringe at all. We started to see them really enter mainstream circles and gain currency. There's a lot of examples of this. I think one personally, two examples. I remember covering a Trump rally in Greenville, North Carolina, where in 2018, I believe, when Donald Trump whipped the crowd into a frenzy, and they started chanting "Send her back" about Ilhan Omar. And similarly, outside, I interviewed two of his Trump supporters that day, and they just casually called for Muslims to be kicked out of the U.S. Just a casual call for ethnic cleansing. And then later, I think a real moment for me was in 2022 at CPAC in Florida. Nick Fuentes, who you mentioned, held a parallel conference at CPAC, AFPAC, American First Political Action Conference. He held it at a secret location in Orlando, with the help of some anti-fascist researchers. I figured out which hotel it was, and I tried to crash it. The Groypers, his supporters, came out and blocked me from doing so, called me some slurs. But what I realized when I got to the hotel and when I eventually watched the live stream and saw who was turning up was that there were all these Republican figures going to this straight up Nazi rally. Marjorie Taylor Greene was speaking there. I broke the news of her appearance there. Tom Homan, the, current head of ICE, was there. He left early, because he claims to have Googled Fuentes' name, and realized that he disagreed with some stuff Fuentes said about Putin. But then Tom Homan, currently in charge of mass deportations right now, he called me back after I talked to him and said, By the way, I'm not saying Reupers are bad, by the way. I'm not denouncing them. That's the dude in charge of our deportations. And there were other figures there too. Joe Arpaio, Steve King, Wendy, what's her face, Rogers from Arizona. So throughout, the last 10 years, I just kept witnessing the fact that, the Republican Party was more than playing footsie with, these Nazi outright fascist elements. Like that was where the real energy was in the American conservative movement.
Every spring, I get the urge to clear out what's been sitting too long in the garage, the inbox, the mental list of things I keep telling myself I'll get to. This year, one of those things was life insurance. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I'd been putting off the actual doing it. You know how it is. The first warm day hits and suddenly you're thinking about everything you want to protect. The life you're building, the people depending on you. That weight is real and it deserves more than a spot on a to-do list. That's where Policy Genius comes in. It's an online insurance marketplace that lets you compare quotes from some of America's top insurers side by side for free. Their licensed team works for you, not the insurance companies. So the guidance you get is actually about your needs. They answer the questions, handle the paperwork, and advocate for you throughout the whole process. No guesswork, just clarity. And they've got thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from real customers who found the right policy for their situation. That kind of track record matters. Protect the life you've built. With Policy Genius, you can see if you can find 20-year life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. Head to policygenius.com/Ken to compare life insurance quotes from top companies and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Ken. It's Ken with a quick break to tell you about my Substack page, where you'll find bonus episodes and other exclusive content. And subscribing is a way to support this show directly without us having to rely on advertisers. For those of you who have signed up, thank you so much. It is growing harder and harder to rely on traditional media. Just look at what has happened over at CBS. So independent news is going to have to make up the gap. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here in the interviews and the commentary that this show brings you, please consider pitching in. It's free to sign up, and that itself is helpful because popular shows get recommended even more people. And if you're able to afford a paid subscription, they start at $8 a month. Every dollar goes back into what we're doing. Thanks for helping out. Can you talk about how these fascistic ideas go mainstream? Because it's not coincidental. It's not an accident. They are floated in certain far-right channels, either online or on podcasts. They're, if you will, they're message tested there. Something like remigration. Pick your mainstream idea now. Give us an example of how it works its way from 4chan onto a mainstream show like Tucker, and then on stage at the RNC. I mean, this is a process we have seen play out again and again. Yeah,
that's a great question. I actually remember the first time I saw the words, I think, the Great Replacement and remigration, and they were in private Nazi chats in about 2018. So, my book is about anti-fascist spies. They go undercover into these groups, and oftentimes they get hold of hundreds of thousands of these groups' internal messages. So, remigration, the Great Replacement, these are European fascist terms. But, in 2017, 2018, you kind of see them arrive on American shores in private Nazi chats. Fast forward a little bit, and you have people like you mentioned Steve Bannon. You have Stephen Miller also working at Breitbart News, and from leaked emails from Breitbart News, we know that Stephen Miller and a lot of the people at Breitbart were actively trying to smuggle, explicit fascist ideas into the mainstream. And you start to see that. There's a lot of these kind of MAGA influencers that act as a bridge between, I would say the 4chan, like you mentioned, and other kind of extreme forums, which almost act like, workshops for fascist messaging. They act as a bridge where they will, source shit from 4chan and other places like that, and then, popularize it to the degree which suddenly it ends up on Fox News and at the RNC. Some names come to mind like Jack Posobiec and Mike Cernovich, Andy Ngo, a lot of kind of like MAGA far right influencers like that. And also websites like Breitbart. You kind of see this normalization of really awful propaganda. I think one of the worst examples that I write about in the book is what happened in Springfield, Ohio, with the rumors about Haitian migrants eating their pets. That was in Nazi chats. A Nazi group called Blood Tribe claimed credit for it. And then, before long, the president and vice president, or future president and vice president of the United States, were spreading that like awful, vicious fascist lie.
And continue to do so. J.D. Vance, just a few weeks ago, restated that after having admitted on the campaign trail that sometimes you have to invent stories to get the media to pay attention to them. Even he knows it's a lie. Of course he knows it's a lie. And the fact that it's a useful lie, though, gives it currency within Trump world. So they continue to roll it out. Do you think a face-off is inevitable within the Republican Party, but really the larger conservative movement, between these fascistic elements, especially the neo-Nazi elements, and the Ben Shapiros and the others who certainly deserve their share of the blame for coddling these movements and these bad actors, but now seem terribly alarmed and surprised that the flames have escaped the box that they thought they were contained in?
It's really interesting seeing like Ben Shapiro, like you mentioned, kind of aghast at what's happening when he's been like the absolute gall, like to be like working alongside someone like Matt Walsh at the Daily Wire, who is just so like, explicitly white nationalist all the time. And then to be shocked that this is the part of the movement that you've like helped create. But as for a conflict, it's been a safe bet for the last 5 years to expect the worst elements of American conservatism to win out. And I'm still going to make that bet. Like, I think the Republican Party is in a bit of a self-destructive death spiral where the most extreme elements are always going to win out. As for that, supposed internal conflict, like I don't know. I mean, what's been really interesting is after Minneapolis, seeing like the uprising against ICE there. And I think so many Americans seeing how brutal ICE's occupation of that city is and the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, that, for the first time in a long time, you saw Trump, at least rhetorically, like retreat, right? Like, he removed Bovino, and they claim to like have left Minneapolis, which they really haven't. But it's the first time I think like you kind of recognize that maybe they had stepped over a line. And what's also interesting is that you see, I believe there was a poll that 20% of Republicans like support abolishing ICE at this point, which is remarkable. That's a huge shift. Remember like however many years ago, abolish ICE as a slogan was written off as this extremely radical left idea. And now it's really enjoying, like, it's reaching like new highs in popularity. I think it's at about 50%. So, I don't know where a moderate conservatism lives anymore in America. It certainly doesn't live in the Republican Party. At this point, at least, especially while Trump is alive, I see this kind of MAGA fascism always winning out in that conflict.
What can ordinary Americans do in addition to buying your book? We'll make sure the link is in the show notes below. What can we do to join the cause of anti-fascism?
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, the single most important thing you can do is buy my book. I think part of what I've been saying is that again, the example set by people in Minneapolis, I find to be utterly remarkable, and is a demonstration of this axiom you hear on the left of "we protect us." It's this idea that no one's coming to save us, so it's up to us to protect our neighbors and protect our loved ones. And you are seeing people really putting their bodies on the line, but also people just doing things to create a social cost for being a part of ICE. For they are manufacturing a shame for being a part of ICE, for being part of this mass deportation project, which is sending our neighbors to concentration camps. They are making sure that, there is a message out there to the people in ICE or joining ICE that you are the Nazis in this movie, and you will be depicted as the villains in the movies your children watch. And I think, Minneapolis is setting a kind of organic grassroots example for the rest of the country. But, it's not only monitoring, surveying, whistling at ICE. It's also, mutual aid, supporting your neighbors, solidarity, not charity, helping them in any way you can, the most marginalized among us. And what I will say is, as soon as you start doing this work, you're going to find a sprawling community of people that feel the way that you do and who have years and years of experience in tactics to defeat this kind of, fascist moment of ours.
Well said. We'll end it there. Thank you so much, Chris. Link to the book is below. Let's check in again soon.
Yeah, please. This was great, Ken. Thank you so much.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.